Rain poured over the northern hills like a silver veil that blurred the horizon and softened the edges of the world. Through the mist, a grey carriage labored along the uneven road, its wheels groaning in steady rhythm. Inside sat Evelyn Marlowe, hands folded tightly around a small, worn Bible. The damp air clung to her dress, and with every sway of the carriage, she felt the familiar unease of stepping toward the unknown. She was on her way to Blackthorn Hall, a great estate said to be older than the century itself, where she had been appointed as governess to a little girl named Amelia. It was not a position of pride, but of necessity. Since her father's passing, Evelyn had depended on her education to survive, taking employment wherever her good name and modest manners could still earn her trust. The coachman called out as the carriage slowed before a towering gate. Beyond the iron bars, she saw the faint outline of the house, its windows glimmering like the watchful eyes of a sleeping beast. When the carriage halted, a servant hurried forward, his dark cloak glistening with rain. Evelyn stepped down carefully, her boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel. The great gate closed behind her with a deep, final sound that echoed in her chest. The servant led her across the courtyard. Withered roses lined the path, their petals turned the color of wine long spilled. Water ran down the carved stone balustrades, catching glints of lantern light. She thought of her father's modest parsonage in Hampshire, of evenings spent beside a hearth where warmth was more of the heart than the fire. That life seemed impossibly distant now. The great doors opened, and she entered the hall. A fire burned low in the marble hearth, and portraits of the Blackthorn ancestors stared down from the walls, their painted faces stern and silent. The scent of wood smoke mingled with wax and polish. Evelyn felt the weight of history pressing upon her, as if the house itself were testing her worth. A tall woman descended the staircase with deliberate grace. Her hair, silvered and perfectly arranged, shone beneath a jeweled comb. "You are Miss Marlowe, I presume," she said in a voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet. This was Lady Agatha, mother to Lord Nathaniel Blackthorn, the master of the house. Evelyn courtesied. "Yes, my lady." "You will find the child delicate of health and spirit," Lady Agatha continued. "It is your duty to keep her obedient and free from unpleasant influences. We do not speak of her late mother in this house. Melancholy serves no one." "Yes, my lady," Evelyn replied softly. "Your room is in the east wing, near the schoolroom. Lord Nathaniel is occupied this evening. You may meet him after supper." With that, the lady turned away, her footsteps fading into the upper corridor. The door closed, and silence returned, save for the whisper of the rain against the windows. Evelyn stood a moment, uncertain, then followed the servant who carried her small trunk down a long passage. She paused at the foot of the grand staircase, where faint music drifted from somewhere above notes of a piano, fragile and slow, as though played by unseen hands. When she lifted her gaze, she saw a child halfway down the stairs. "Are you the one who will teach me to read?" the girl asked in a careful voice. Evelyn smiled. "If you will promise to teach me about this house in return, quote." The child's lips curved into a shy smile, and she nodded before darting away, her laughter echoing faintly through the hall. Later, alone in her chamber, Evelyn drew back the curtains. The rain had softened to a steady whisper. From her window she could see the gardens dark, tangled and veiled in mist. Somewhere near the edge of the trees, a shadow moved, or seemed to. She leaned forward, but the figure was gone. Perhaps it had been only the wind. She sat for a long time, watching droplets trace paths down the glass. There was a heaviness in her chest she could not name, something between anticipation and dread. Still, she told herself that morning would bring purpose, that she would keep to her duty and silence the voice of curiosity already stirring within her. Before extinguishing the lamp, she whispered a short prayer, the kind her father once said at the end of every weary day. The flame flickered, casting its last light across the room, then went out, leaving only the steady rhythm of rain upon the roof and the slow toll of the clock from the corridor beyond. 3 deep chimes rang through the night. Her first day at Blackthorn Hall had begun, wrapped in silence and the faint scent of secrets waiting to be uncovered. If this beginning has drawn you in, I invite you to stay with Evelyn on her journey. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and keep the light burning for stories that speak to the quiet corners of the heart. Morning crept into Blackthorn Hall with a hush, as though the house itself feared to disturb its sleeping memories. Pale light filtered through the curtains of Evelyn's small chamber, turning the air a gentle gold. She woke early, long before the servants began their quiet routines, and sat by the window listening to the distant caw of crows beyond the orchard. The storm of the night before had passed, but a lingering mist clung to the gardens, silvering every branch. Evelyn dressed modestly in a grey gown that had been mended more times than she cared to count. She tied her hair neatly, pinned it low, and took a steadying breath. Today she would meet Lord Nathaniel Blackthorne, her employer, and the master of this vast whispering house. The thought filled her with both curiosity and unease. The corridor outside her room was long and shadowed. Portraits lined the walls, ancestors of the family, their painted eyes following her steps. She descended to the breakfast room where the fire had already been lit. The warmth was welcome after the damp chill of the hallways. A maid brought tea and murmured that Lord Nathaniel would join her shortly. When he entered, Evelyn rose. Her first impression was of height and stillness. He was not a young man, though his bearing had the strength of one who had faced more battles of the heart than of the field. His hair was dark with a touch of grey at the temples, his face marked by quiet intelligence rather than vanity. "Miss Marlowe," he said with a slight bow. "I trust you found your room comfortable." "Hoot." "Yes, my lord," she replied, keeping her voice calm though her pulse quickened. "The accommodations are most suitable." "Good. You have met my mother, I believe." "I have, my lord. She was kind enough to explain my duties." At that he almost smiled, though the expression faded as swiftly as it came. "Kindness is not always her chosen virtue," he said, "but I am glad she spoke with you." He motioned for her to sit. They took breakfast in near silence, the sound of rain dripping from the eaves the only accompaniment. Evelyn wondered what sort of grief could draw such reserve around a man. There was a heaviness about him, not cruelty but sorrow worn thin by time. When the meal ended, he rose and asked if she would accompany him to the schoolroom. The hallways echoed faintly beneath their footsteps. Evelyn noticed that every door they passed was closed, as though the rooms beyond held secrets too fragile to face daylight. "This wing of the house," he said, "belonged to my late wife. We have left it largely untouched." The admission was simple, but the air between them thickened. Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I understand, my lord. I shall be careful." He opened a door near the end of the corridor. Inside was a bright chamber filled with shelves of books and a small piano by the window. Dust motes danced in the light. "Here you will instruct Amelia. She takes to reading well but struggles with concentration. I fear the loss of her mother has left shadows that neither of us can fully dispel." Evelyn nodded. "Children often speak their sorrow in silence, my lord. I will do what I can to bring her comfort." He looked at her then, and for the first time she felt his full attention. It was not a gaze of rank or authority, but of genuine regard, as though he were trying to read the measure of her soul. "You speak with understanding, Miss Marlowe. That is rare." "I have known loss myself," she said quietly. "It teaches one to listen differently." He inclined his head. "Then perhaps you are exactly what my daughter needs." A faint smile touched her lips, and she curtsied. "I shall do my best to prove worthy of your trust." Crude. The moment lingered, filled with unspoken respect. Then he turned away, glancing toward the window where the mist still hung over the gardens. "Blackthorne Hall can be lonely, Miss Marlowe. Its walls remember too much. If ever you find the atmosphere oppressive, you have my leave to walk in the grounds. Solitude can be more gentle beneath the open sky." "I will remember, my lord." He left soon after, and the room felt larger for his absence. Evelyn ran her fingers lightly across the piano keys. The instrument gave a soft, uncertain sound, as though surprised by touch after a long silence. She wondered if the late Lady Blackthorne had once played these very notes. Later that morning, Amelia entered shyly. The child's face brightened at the sight of the open books and the chalk slate waiting on the table. Evelyn knelt beside her. "We shall start slowly," she said. "There is no need for hurry." Quote. As they began their lesson, Evelyn caught sight of Lord Nathaniel passing outside the door. He paused, watching unseen, a brief softness crossing his features before he walked on. By the end of the lesson, Amelia laughed for the first time, her voice like a small bell in the quiet room. Evelyn smiled to herself, unaware that beyond the hall, the master of the house had paused again, listening to that fragile sound, and feeling for the first time in many months that life might still return to these echoing walls. Days at Blackthorne Hall settled into a quiet rhythm that at first felt comforting to Evelyn. Each morning she rose before dawn, her candle flickering against the pale blue of the walls, and prepared lessons for Amelia. The little girl's curiosity grew daily, her laughter beginning to echo through corridors that had long been silent. Yet beneath that growing warmth, Evelyn sensed something uneasy moving, like a faint current beneath still water. The servants spoke little in her presence, but their eyes often shifted toward the west wing of the house. It was always closed, its heavy doors sealed since the death of Lady Isabel Blackthorne. When Evelyn once wandered near it, she was quickly intercepted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Griggs, who whispered, "Best stay clear of that part of the house, miss. Some things are better left undisturbed." Evelyn offered a polite nod, though the warning only deepened her curiosity. That night, as she sat by the schoolroom window correcting Amelia's handwriting, she heard a faint melody floating through the hall. It was the same tune she had heard on her first evening, the gentle rise and fall of a piano played with sorrowful restraint. Thinking perhaps Lord Nathaniel was playing to soothe his thoughts, she opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The sound grew clearer, drifting from the west wing, but as she drew near, the notes faltered and vanished, leaving behind only silence. When she returned to her room, she found Amelia awake, clutching her doll beneath the covers. "Were you playing the piano?" the child asked. Evelyn shook her head and smiled softly. "No, my dear. I thought it was you." Amelia's eyes widened. "It was Mama. She comes when the house is lonely. She says the walls remember her songs." Evelyn felt a chill despite the fire burning low in the grate. She sat beside the child and smoothed her hair. "Dreams can sound very real sometimes," she said gently. "It was only the wind." Quote. But when the girl drifted back to sleep, Evelyn remained by her side, listening. Somewhere deep within the house, the wind moved again through the chimneys, and for a heartbeat she could almost swear she heard a final lingering chord. The next morning she mentioned it casually to Mrs. Griggs over tea. The woman stiffened. "Best not to repeat such things, miss. His lordship has no patience for ghostly talk. The young mistress has suffered enough." Quote. Evelyn nodded, deciding to keep her thoughts to herself. Still, she could not dismiss the strange feeling that the house was alive, its silence layered with whispers too faint to understand. Later that week, while arranging books in the schoolroom, she discovered a loose floorboard near the desk. At first she thought nothing of it, but curiosity compelled her to pry it open. Beneath lay a small compartment filled with yellowing papers, among them a sealed letter addressed in elegant handwriting. To ease. The wax was cracked with age, and though she hesitated, her sense of duty to the truth outweighed her fear of intrusion. She unfolded the letter carefully. The words within were faint but legible. "My dearest E, if these lines reach you, know that I am afraid. I have learned something that cannot be spoken aloud, not even to him. If I disappear, remember that silence here is never innocent." Evelyn read the passage twice, her heart beating fast. There was no signature beyond the simple initials IB, which could only belong to Isabel Blackthorne. She refolded the letter, hands trembling, and returned it to its hiding place. Whatever secret it contained was not yet hers to reveal. That evening Amelia noticed her distraction. "You look sad, Miss Marlowe. Did someone scold you?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, darling. I was only thinking of how quickly autumn passes. Leaves fall before we learn to love their color." Amelia considered this, then nodded with solemn wisdom beyond her years. "Papa says time takes everything unless we keep it safe." Her words struck Evelyn with quiet force. Was that what Lord Nathaniel was doing, keeping time itself locked away behind the doors of the West Wing, protecting memory, or hiding guilt? As the weeks went on, Evelyn saw more of him. Sometimes he joined them during lessons, standing silently near the window as Amelia read aloud. His presence filled the room not with authority but with a strange melancholy. Once, while the child traced letters in chalk, he asked, "Do you believe houses hold memory, Miss Marlowe?" She hesitated before answering. "I think they hold what we leave behind: laughter, sorrow, promises never kept. Perhaps they listen even when we wish they would forget." Quote. He studied her face, something flickering in his eyes. "You speak as though you know what it is to live among ghosts." Evelyn lowered her gaze. "We all do, my lord, in our own way." Their conversation ended there, yet the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken understanding. She sensed he carried burdens untold, and she feared the letter hidden beneath the floorboards might be one of them. That night, unable to sleep, she took out her candle and returned to the schoolroom. Kneeling by the desk, she opened the floor again and reread the letter. The ink had faded, but one line seemed to glimmer in the candlelight. "If I disappear, remember that silence here is never innocent." She blew out the flame and sat in darkness, the echo of those words entwined with the faint sound of distant music, soft, sorrowful, and impossibly human. The following days unfolded beneath a sky the color of pewter, the light pale and constant. Evelyn went about her duties as usual, yet she felt the hidden letter beneath the floorboards like a heartbeat under her feet. It seemed to hum quietly whenever she passed the schoolroom. Though she told herself to leave it be, its presence filled her thoughts, shaping each conversation and shadowing every look that crossed the master's face. On the 5th morning she was summoned to Lady Agatha's parlour. The message came through a maid whose eyes darted nervously toward the west wing as she spoke. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and followed the woman down the long corridor. The air grew colder the nearer they came to the older part of the house. The parlour was grand but severe, its curtains drawn against the grey daylight. Lady Agatha sat by the fire in a chair that seemed almost too large for her frail figure. Her hands rested on the carved arms like pale birds. "Miss Marlowe," she began without preamble, "I understand you have developed quite an interest in corners of the house that do not concern your employment." Evelyn felt her breath catch. "I beg your pardon, my lady. I assure you I have done nothing improper." The older woman's gaze was sharp. "Improper? No, perhaps not yet. But curiosity is a dangerous indulgence for those who depend upon the favour of others." Evelyn clasped her hands tightly. "If I have given offence, I am deeply sorry. My only concern is the well-being of Miss Amelia." Lady Agatha's thin lips curved in a smile without warmth. "See that it remains so. This house has known enough disturbances. The dead should be left in peace." There was finality in her tone, a wall of ice that allowed no argument. Evelyn bowed her head and murmured her apology. Yet as she left the room, she could not shake the feeling that Lady Agatha's warning came not from superstition but from fear. That evening the house prepared for a rare dinner in the formal dining room. Lord Nathaniel had returned from the nearby village, where he had been attending to tenants' affairs. Evelyn and Amelia ate earlier with the servants, but as she passed the main hall later, she glimpsed him through the open door. The candlelight drew soft lines across his face, revealing fatigue and something gentler beneath it. He saw her in the doorway and rose slightly. "Miss Marlowe," he said, his voice calm, "would you care to join me for a cup of tea? It is late, but conversation might be a kinder company than silence." The invitation startled her. "If it would not trouble you, my lord." "Not in the least. Come, sit near the fire." The room was warm and bright, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and maps that smelled faintly of dust and sea salt. Evelyn sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. For a moment neither spoke, the crackle of the fire the only sound. "You seem troubled of late," he said at last. "I hope my mother has not been unkind." "She has been gracious, my lord," Evelyn replied carefully. "I fear my own thoughts have been less obedient than my tongue." He looked at her with quiet amusement. "That is an honest confession. May I ask what thoughts disobey you?" Evelyn hesitated. "Sometimes I wonder about the past, about how its echoes shape the present. This house feels as though it remembers too much." He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Memory can be both comfort and curse. When my wife died, I believed silence would protect us from grief, but silence only fed it." Her gaze softened. "I am sorry, my lord. Grief does not vanish when unspoken. It only hides until we are too weary to resist it." He nodded slowly. "You speak wisely, Miss Marlowe. Perhaps wiser than you realize." They fell silent again. The fire threw small sparks that drifted upward and faded. In that stillness, Evelyn sensed a quiet shift between them, not of impropriety but of recognition. She saw in him a man trying to rebuild a life from ashes. He saw in her someone who had learned to walk with sorrow without letting it define her. After a while he rose and poured tea for them both. The scent of bergamot filled the air. "When I was a boy," he said, handing her a cup, "I believed every shadow hid a monster. My mother told me shadows exist only because there is light. I thought it a comfort then. Now I wonder if it was a warning." Evelyn met his eyes over the rim of her cup. "Perhaps both are true." He smiled faintly, and the weariness in his features eased. "You have a talent for balance, Miss Marlowe. A house like this requires it." She inclined her head. "I try to listen before I speak. Walls, I find, are better company when they are heard." A spark of laughter escaped him, low and genuine. "You make even silence sound virtuous." The warmth of the moment lingered until the clock struck 9. Evelyn set down her cup and stood. "Thank you, my lord, for your kindness. It has been a long time since I spoke so freely." "The gratitude is mine," he replied. "You remind me that even in this house, conversation can still heal." As she left, his voice followed softly. "Miss Marlowe, should anyone trouble you about your conduct or curiosity, refer them to me." She turned in surprise. "You are very generous." "Not generosity," he said quietly. "Merely justice." She bowed and withdrew, her heart unsteady. For the first time since her arrival, she felt both protected and exposed, as though his trust were a light that could reveal her secrets as easily as it dispelled his own. That night she dreamed of the West Wing, of closed doors and faint music. When she woke before dawn, her pulse was still racing, and she knew that whatever bound this house to its silence was drawing her closer each day. That night, the wind rose again, curling through the chimneys and rattling the panes of Evelyn's window. The fire had burned low, and the room was filled with the soft creak of timber that old houses make when they dream. She lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that something in the hall was moving. The faint sound of footsteps reached her ears, too deliberate to be the wind, too cautious to belong to the servants. She slipped from bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and opened the door a crack. The corridor stretched before her, dimly lit by a single lamp. Down the far end, near the entrance to the forbidden West Wing, she caught a flicker of movement. A figure in a dark cloak passed swiftly across the light and vanished into shadow. Evelyn's breath caught. Whoever it was carried a small lamp, its flame shielded by a hand that trembled slightly. Without fully deciding why, she followed. The floor beneath her feet was cold, the boards sighing softly with each step. As she drew nearer, she recognized the shape of the intruder. It was Lydia, one of the older housemaids. The woman's shoulders hunched as though bearing a secret too heavy to hold upright. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, watching as Lydia slipped a key into the lock of a narrow door that led into the West Wing. The hinges groaned faintly, then silence returned. Evelyn hesitated. Every sensible thought urged her to turn back, but curiosity held her fast. She waited until the door closed, then crept forward. Through the keyhole she could see the faint glow of Lydia's lamp, bobbing along the passage. After a moment, Evelyn turned the handle carefully. The latch gave with a soft click. The air beyond was cooler, carrying the dry scent of rooms long closed. Dust coated the floor like grey velvet, unbroken except for the small footprints leading away from her. She followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. The corridor opened into what must once have been a dressing room. The furniture stood beneath white cloths, and cobwebs stretched like lace from corner to corner. Lydia knelt beside a trunk, her lamp trembling as she lifted the lid. Evelyn could not see what she took from inside, but she heard the rustle of paper, then the sound of quiet weeping. It was not the sobbing of guilt, but the weary grief of one who has mourned too long in silence. When Lydia rose, she clutched something small and square in her hands, a wooden box bound with a ribbon that had faded to the color of dust. At that moment, the floor creaked beneath Evelyn's foot. Lydia whirled around, her face pale in the lamplight. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Evelyn stepped forward, heart hammering. "It is only me, Lydia. Forgive me. I heard a noise and thought someone might be in danger." The maid's eyes darted toward the door. "You should not be here, miss. No one should." "I mean no harm," Evelyn said gently. "But if there is something wrong, perhaps I can help." Lydia clutched the box tighter. "Help? No one can help, not now. The dead are best left where they lie." Evelyn took a step closer. "Is that what this place is about? The dead?" Lydia's gaze dropped to the floor. "She was kind to me," she murmured. "Too kind. And look what kindness brought her." Before Evelyn could ask more, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Lydia's face drained of color. "Go," she hissed. "If they find us here, it will be the end for both of us." Evelyn turned toward the door, but not before she saw Lydia tuck the small box beneath her cloak. Together, they slipped out into the main hall, just as a distant clock began to strike midnight. The echoes followed them down the stairs like the tolling of a warning. When they reached the lower landing, Lydia stopped. "Forget what you saw," she said, her voice low but fierce. "For your own sake, forget it. Some secrets keep their owners safe only as long as no one else knows them." "Lydia," Evelyn began, "I do not wish to bring trouble. I only want to understand what is haunting this house." Quote. The maid gave a broken laugh. "It is not the house that haunts us, miss. It is what we did to make it quiet." Before Evelyn could question her, Lydia turned and disappeared into the servants' passage, leaving behind only the faint smell of candle wax and something darker fear. Evelyn stood motionless, her thoughts racing. She felt certain now that Lady Isabel's letter and Lydia's secret were bound together, threads of the same web that stretched through every corner of Blackthorn Hall. The silence of the house no longer felt like peace, but like the pause between truths too dangerous to speak. Back in her chamber, she stared into the dying fire until only embers remained. The images of Lydia's pale face and the ribbon-bound box burned behind her eyes. Whatever lay hidden in that trunk, It was something the family had buried as surely as they had buried their dead. Outside, the wind howled across the moor, and the windows shuddered. Evelyn drew the blanket close around her shoulders and whispered into the dark. Silence is never innocent. The words of the letter came back to her, clearer than ever, and she knew that by following Lydia into the forbidden wing, she had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Morning came slowly, with the pale light of dawn struggling through a shroud of fog. The air smelled of damp earth and ashes from fires burned too low during the night. Evelyn rose early, her mind restless from the memories of the West Wing. She could still see Lydia's frightened eyes and hear her warning echoing in the silence. When she descended to the breakfast room, the atmosphere in the house felt altered, as though the walls themselves had learned what she had done. The servants moved quickly and spoke in hushed tones. Mrs. Griggs avoided meeting her gaze. Even Amelia, usually bright and curious, seemed subdued. Before Evelyn could ask after her pupil, the butler appeared in the doorway. "Miss Marlowe, her ladyship requests your presence in the drawing-room." The request was not one that could be declined. Evelyn smoothed her skirt, steadied her breath, and followed. Lady Agatha was waiting by the tall windows, dressed in black silk that caught the morning light like a sheen of ice. Her cane rested against the chair beside her, and though her frame was slight, her presence filled the room with authority. "Miss Marlowe," she began, "you were seen near the West Wing last night." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken but kept her composure. "I was restless and could not sleep, my lady. I may have wandered farther than I intended." "Farther than you intended," Lady Agatha repeated, her voice soft but edged like steel. "That explanation will not do. You were not wandering, you were prying. There are doors in this house that have been closed for a reason." "I assure you I meant no harm," Evelyn said. "I heard noises and thought someone might require assistance." "Indeed," Lady Agatha said coldly. "And did you find what you were seeking?" Evelyn met her gaze steadily. "Only dust and shadows, my lady." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "You would be wise to remember your place. I will not have servants' gossip revived by an overcurious governess. This house stands on reputation as much as on stone, and both can crumble if neglected." Before Evelyn could answer, another voice interrupted. "That will be enough, mother." Lord Nathaniel had entered unnoticed, his expression composed but firm. He crossed the room and stood beside Evelyn, his presence a quiet shield. "Miss Marlowe has done nothing improper," he said. "If there were noises in the West Wing, then it is my responsibility to see to them." Lady Agatha turned sharply. "Your leniency will ruin you, Nathaniel. It already invites whispers." "Let them whisper," he replied. "I will not condemn an innocent woman for hearing what others choose to ignore." Their eyes met, mother and son, a battle of pride and pain stretching silently between them. Lady Agatha's face softened for a moment, almost sorrowfully, before she turned away. "As you wish, but when ruin comes, do not say you were not warned." Cusbadding, she left the room with slow, deliberate steps, the tap of her cane fading down the corridor. For a time, neither Evelyn nor Lord Nathaniel spoke. The air seemed charged with what had not been said. At last he turned to her. "You must forgive my mother. She clings to rules because they are all that remain of her certainty." Evelyn shook her head. "There is nothing to forgive, my lord. I understand her fear. The West Wing holds more than dust, does it not?" He regarded her quietly. "It holds memory, and memory has claws. My wife died there, Miss Marlowe. Every echo reminds my mother of that loss. She believes silence is safety." Evelyn's voice softened. "And you?" He hesitated. "I once thought the same, but silence has only chained us to grief." The words hung between them, fragile and honest. Evelyn felt the tremor of recognition again, that quiet sympathy that bound their sorrows together. "If I have caused distress, I regret it deeply," she said. "I sought only to protect your daughter." "You have done more than that," he said. "You have brought life back to her and perhaps to me." He seemed startled by his own admission, and for a moment he looked away. Outside the window, mist drifted across the garden, catching the light like smoke. "I cannot ask you to forget what you have seen or heard," he said finally, "but I would ask your discretion. There are truths in this house that even I do not fully know." Evelyn nodded. "You have my word, my lord. Yet truth rarely sleeps forever." A faint smile touched his lips. "You have courage, Miss Marlowe. Most would flee rather than speak so plainly." "Courage and fear are often companions," she replied softly. "It is only that I fear falsehood more." He studied her, his expression unreadable but not cold. "Then we are alike in that." They stood a moment longer before he excused himself to attend to estate matters. When he was gone, Evelyn remained by the window, her hands trembling slightly. The fog outside was thinning, revealing the outline of the west wing. She thought of Lydia and the small box bound with a faded ribbon. Somewhere within those rooms lay the answer to every uneasy silence in Blackthorn Hall. Later, while teaching Amelia her letters, Evelyn caught sight of Lady Agatha passing in the garden, her black dress stark against the pale grass. The older woman's face was unreadable, but Evelyn sensed a new resolve in her gait, as though she too were preparing for a reckoning. That evening, when the lamps were lit, Lord Nathaniel paused outside the schoolroom door. Amelia had fallen asleep over her book, and Evelyn was tucking a blanket around her shoulders. He whispered, "You are patient with her. It is a rare gift." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Patience is learned through loss, my lord." "Wait." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Perhaps, or perhaps it is born from strength. Good night, Miss Marlowe." "Good night, my lord." When he had gone, she sat for a while in the quiet room. The firelight shimmered across the polished piano, and once again she felt the weight of the unseen letter beneath the floor. The day had brought her closer to both trust and danger, and she no longer knew which she feared more. The next morning arrived, wrapped in mist so thick that the garden seemed to float upon clouds. Evelyn awoke with the uneasy feeling that someone had spoken her name during the night. She dismissed it as the echo of dreams and went about preparing lessons for Amelia. Yet when she stepped into the corridor, a folded note lay upon the floor outside her door. Her heart quickened. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, and the paper smelled faintly of candle smoke. She opened it and read, "Miss Marlowe, meet me by the old fountain at noon. Come alone. There is something you must know. L." The initial left no doubt. Lydia. All morning, Evelyn tried to keep her composure. Amelia's laughter rose and fell as they practiced reading aloud, but Evelyn's thoughts wandered. Every clock chime drew her closer to the appointed hour. She worried that Lady Agatha or the other servants might suspect her absence, yet curiosity and concern outweighed every caution. When the clock struck 12, Evelyn excused herself under the pretense of taking a walk for fresh air. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the shape of the gardens beyond the terrace. The old fountain stood near the edge of the orchard, a crumbling stone basin adorned with moss and wild ivy. Its waters had long since run dry. Lydia waited there, her cloak drawn tightly about her. She looked pale, her eyes red as if from sleeplessness. When Evelyn approached, the maid glanced over her shoulder before speaking. "Thank you for coming, miss. I did not think you would." "I had to," Evelyn replied. "You asked for help, though you may not have meant to. What is troubling you?" Lydia's hands trembled as she drew something from beneath her cloak, the small wooden box bound with the faded ribbon. "This belonged to her ladyship," she whispered. "I should never have taken it, but I could not bear to see it locked away forever." "Causant," Evelyn's breath caught. "Lady Isabel's box?" Lydia nodded. "Inside are letters, not the kind meant for her husband. They were written to another, a friend perhaps more. I do not know, but there is one that frightened me." She loosened the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay several sheets of delicate paper, folded carefully but yellowed with age. Lydia handed one to Evelyn. The handwriting was the same she had seen on the hidden letter beneath the schoolroom floor. "My dearest E," it began, "I have learned something that could destroy everything. If I speak, they will silence me. If I remain silent, they will bury the truth beside me. I trust only you. Remember that kindness here has a cost, and loyalty is seldom without chains." Evelyn read the lines twice, her throat dry. "This E, do you know who that might be?" Lydia shook her head. "No one ever said. Some believe it was a friend she had before her marriage, someone she corresponded with even after. Others whisper it was a relative, perhaps the housekeeper at her family's estate, but I fear it was someone much closer." "Closer?" Evelyn repeated softly. Lydia hesitated. Lord Nathaniel loved her deeply, but love can turn to sorrow when truth is hidden. I think she discovered something that could shame the family, and when she tried to tell him, she vanished. Evelyn frowned. "Vanished? I was told she died of illness." "That is what they all were told," Lydia said bitterly. "But I was there that night. She was well the evening before. Then the next morning her chamber was locked, and no one saw her again. They said she had taken ill suddenly, but I never saw a body, miss. Never." The words struck Evelyn like a blow. The fog around them seemed to thicken again, muffling the world. "Why tell me this now?" she asked. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "Because they will not let me keep silent any longer. Lady Agatha suspects I still have the box. She will come for it soon, and when she does, She will destroy everything inside. You are not like the others, miss. You have courage. I thought perhaps you could protect the truth where I could not. Evelyn took the box, feeling its fragile weight in her hands. If what you say is true, it is dangerous for both of us, but I will keep it safe. Lydia nodded weakly. Be careful. The walls here have ears, and not all who listen mean well. A sound startled them, a faint rustle from the hedges. Lydia's face blanched. Someone followed us. She pushed Evelyn toward the orchard path. Go now, miss, quickly. Pretend we never met. Come with me, Evelyn urged. I cannot. They would know. Please. Reluctantly, Evelyn turned and walked swiftly back toward the house, clutching the box beneath her shawl. She did not look back, though she longed to. When she reached the terrace, she glanced once toward the fountain. The spot was empty. Lydia was gone, leaving only the mist swirling where she had stood. That night, Evelyn placed the box in the drawer of her desk and locked it. She sat awake for hours, the fire casting uneasy shadows across the room. Every creak of the floor sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a whisper of warning. When at last she drifted into sleep, her dreams were filled with images of letters fluttering in the wind, pages scattering like white birds across the garden, and a woman's voice whispering her name again and again. Morning broke under a sky the color of tarnished silver. The air inside Blackthorn Hall was strangely still, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Evelyn descended to the breakfast room to find Mrs. Griggs and the younger maids whispering in the corner. The moment they saw her, their conversation stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. She poured herself a cup of tea, her hand steady though her heart was not. Is something the matter? She asked. Mrs. Griggs exchanged a glance with one of the maids before answering. Lydia has gone, miss. Her bed was empty this morning. No one saw her leave. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Gone? Without a word? The housekeeper nodded grimly. A carriage was heard before dawn, though no one could say whose it was. Lady Agatha is in a state over it. She believes the girl took something from her room. Evelyn forced herself to appear calm. How unfortunate, she said softly. Perhaps Lydia had family in the village. None that we know of, Mrs. Griggs replied. Her belongings are still here, except for a few clothes. Strange if she meant to leave for good. Evelyn felt the weight of the wooden box locked in her desk upstairs. Indeed, she murmured. Very strange. Before long, a message arrived, summoning her to Lady Agatha's sitting room. Evelyn found the older woman pacing near the window, her expression sharp and restless. Miss Marlowe, she said, you had some acquaintance with Lydia, did you not? Evelyn chose her words carefully. Only in passing, my lady. She was kind enough to assist me on occasion. Kind? Lady Agatha repeated with a trace of scorn. That girl was sly. I warned Nathaniel years ago that the servants of this house know more than they should. Now she has vanished, and I intend to find out what she took with her. Perhaps she was frightened, Evelyn offered. She seemed troubled of late. Lady Agatha's gaze narrowed. Frightened of what, Miss Marlowe? Or should I say of whom? Evelyn met her eyes calmly. Of the past, perhaps. The past has a way of reaching into the present. The older woman's lips tightened. You speak too freely for your position. I will not tolerate insolence in my house. Before Evelyn could reply, the door opened. Lord Nathaniel entered, his expression composed but weary. Mother, he said, you are interrogating my employee as though she were a thief. That will stop. Lady Agatha turned on him. And what would you have me do, Nathaniel? Lydia is gone. She may have taken something dangerous, something that could ruin us all. His voice hardened. Then let us hope she did, for I am tired of this family being ruled by secrets and silence. Evelyn felt the tension between them like a physical weight. Lady Agatha's eyes blazed with anger. You speak of silence, as if it were guilt. Some truths destroy more than they free. Perhaps, he replied evenly, but lies have already destroyed enough. He turned to Evelyn then, his tone softening. Forgive this unpleasantness, Miss Marlowe. I fear our household has forgotten its manners. Quote. Evelyn inclined her head. There is nothing to forgive, my lord. I hope only for Lydia's safety. When she left the room, she could still hear Lady Agatha's voice behind her, low and trembling. If that girl breathes a word of what she saw, everything we have built will fall to dust. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. The servants went about their duties with anxious faces, and the corridors seemed colder than before. Amelia sensed the tension and clung to Evelyn more than usual. That afternoon, while reading to the child in the library, Evelyn noticed Lord Nathaniel standing in the doorway. His expression was troubled, his eyes shadowed by thought. When Amelia ran off to fetch her doll, he approached. "There is something I must ask you," he said. "Did Lydia ever confide in you? Anything about my late wife?" Evelyn hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "Because my mother is certain Lydia knew more than she should. I cannot decide whether to believe her." Quote, Evelyn met his gaze. "Your mother fears the past, my lord. Lydia feared it too. Whatever happened to Lady Isabel still lives in these walls, waiting for someone brave enough to look." He studied her face, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "You speak as though you already know the truth." "I only know that silence here has weight," she said quietly. "It presses on everyone, including you." He turned away, his hands clasped behind his back. "When Isabel died, my mother forbade me to question the circumstances. I obeyed because grief makes cowards of us all, but perhaps obedience was the greater sin." Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. "It is never too late to ask what truly happened." He looked back at her, his expression softening. "Would you still say that if the truth were uglier than you imagine?" "I would," she answered, "because only truth can heal what silence has wounded." "Cousin." He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "You have courage, Miss Marlowe. I envy it." As he left, she felt her heart twist with pity, and something deeper she dared not name. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, dust motes turning golden in the air. Somewhere beyond the house, a carriage rattled along the road, its sound fading into the distance. That night, Evelyn unlocked her desk and lifted the lid of the wooden box. The letters lay inside, fragile as autumn leaves. She hesitated, then drew out the one signed only with the initials IB. The candlelight caught the ink where it had once been smudged by a tear. She traced the final line with her finger. "Silence here is never innocent." For the first time she understood that these were not merely words of warning but of confession. Isabel Blackthorne had died knowing too much, and someone in this house had made certain her story would never be told. Rain returned that night, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the windows like fingers tapping for attention. Evelyn could not sleep. The letters on her desk seemed to whisper each time the wind shifted, calling her toward the truth she had promised to protect. By the hour before dawn, she could bear the weight of silence no longer. When morning came, she dressed simply and carried the wooden box with her to the library. Lord Nathaniel was there already, standing before the fire, his back to the room. Papers lay scattered across the table beside him, but his eyes were fixed on the flames. He looked as though he had not slept either. "My lord," she said softly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Miss Marlowe, you are early. I must speak with you. It cannot wait." He gestured toward a chair. "Then speak." Evelyn placed the box on the table between them. "These belonged to Lady Isabel. Lydia found them hidden in the West Wing. She gave them to me before she vanished." His eyes darkened. "You have them here? Do you realize the danger in keeping such things?" "I realize only that they hold the truth," she said quietly, "and that truth has been buried long enough." He looked at the box as though it might burn him. "My mother forbade me ever to disturb my wife's belongings. I obeyed out of duty, perhaps also out of fear. What do these letters contain?" Evelyn lifted the top letter carefully and handed it to him. "Read for yourself." He hesitated, then took it. His gaze followed the faded lines, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, then to something like grief. When he spoke, his voice was low. "These were written to someone named E. Do you know who that is?" "No," Evelyn said. "But whoever E was, Lady Isabel trusted them. She wrote of something she had discovered, something dangerous." Coat. He continued reading in silence, his brow furrowing. When he reached the final line, he exhaled slowly and looked up. She believed someone in this house meant her harm. Evelyn nodded, and she feared that speaking the truth would cost her life. He stared at the letter, his hands tightening around the paper. "My mother told me Isabel fell ill suddenly. There was no physician, only the servants. I accepted her word without question. God forgive me. I never even saw my wife's body before the coffin was sealed." "You were grieving," Evelyn said gently. "It is human to trust those we love when we are too broken to ask why." He sank into the chair, the letter trembling slightly in his grasp. "If what she wrote is true, then my mother—" He stopped, the rest of the sentence lost in the weight of the unspoken. Evelyn sat across from him, her voice steady. "I do not ask you to condemn her, my lord, only to face what has been hidden. The silence that smothers this house will destroy it if it continues." He looked up, pain and anger warring in his eyes. You speak of truth as though it were a blessing, Miss Marlowe. But truth can ruin families, reputations, lives. Then let it, she said softly. Better ruin than false peace. He studied her, and for a moment she feared she had gone too far. Then his expression changed, and the steel in his voice softened to something like admiration. You are not afraid of me. Evelyn smiled faintly. I am afraid of many things, my lord, but not of you. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows against the walls. He set the letter down and rubbed his temples. If I confront my mother, she will deny everything. If I accuse her falsely, I destroy what little remains of this family's honor. And yet if I remain silent, then Lady Isabel's death remains meaningless. Evelyn finished gently. And Lydia's disappearance will follow her into the same darkness. He raised his head. You believe my mother capable of harm? I believe her capable of desperation, Evelyn replied. And desperation can be crueler than malice. He nodded slowly. You may be right. There were moments, small things, that troubled me even then. Isabel once told me she feared for her letters, that someone was intercepting them. I dismissed it as imagination. Now I see it was warning. Quote, Evelyn watched as he rose and walked to the window. Outside, the rain blurred the gardens into grey mist. You loved her, she said. Yes, he answered, but I did not know her. Grief has a cruel habit of turning memory into perfection. Perhaps that is why I never sought the truth. It was easier to worship her absence than to question it. Then it is time to know her as she truly was, Evelyn said. Not as a saint, but as a woman who trusted you enough to write these words. Quote. He turned back, his gaze meeting hers with quiet intensity. You believe I owe her justice. I believe you owe yourself peace. Something in her tone seemed to reach him. He came closer, his expression grave but resolved. If I read the rest of these letters, I will not be able to unlearn what I discover. Are you prepared for that as well? Evelyn's heart thudded, but she did not look away. Yes, whatever truth they hold, we will face it together. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain eased to a whisper, and the fire burned low, its light trembling like breath. Finally he said, Then tonight, after the house sleeps, I will read them all. And when dawn comes, we shall decide what must be done. Evelyn nodded. I will be ready. As she left the library, she glanced once more at the box resting on the table. It seemed so small, so fragile, yet it contained enough truth to shatter everything built upon silence. Behind her, Lord Nathaniel remained by the fire, the letter in his hand, his face turned toward the storm beyond the window, as though searching for the courage to face the storm within himself. Night descended upon Blackthorn Hall with a kind of deliberate stillness, as though even the wind hesitated to disturb what was about to unfold. The servants retired early, the fires burned low, and a pale moon rose behind a veil of drifting clouds. Evelyn sat awake in her chamber, listening to the steady ticking of the clock on the mantel. Each sound marked the narrowing distance to the hour Lord Nathaniel had chosen. When the final chime of 11 echoed through the corridors, she wrapped a shawl about her shoulders and carried a candle to the library. The door was already open. Inside, Lord Nathaniel stood by the table, the wooden box before him. The letters lay spread across the surface like fallen leaves, their edges curled with age. You came, he said quietly. I said I would. He inclined his head toward the chair opposite his own. Then stay. I would not read these alone. She sat, the flicker of the candle reflecting in her eyes. He unfolded the first letter, the parchment brittle beneath his fingers. The room held its breath as he began to read. The words spoke of affection and longing, of regret that love must hide beneath the guise of friendship. They were written with tenderness but shadowed by fear. Isabel wrote of strange arguments overheard between her husband and his father, of accounts that did not balance, of threats whispered behind closed doors. As the letters continued, the tone darkened. She had discovered that the elder Lord Blackthorn, Nathaniel's father, had misused the family's fortune, forging documents and selling lands meant for inheritance. When she confronted him, he swore her to silence. Yet she wrote to her confidant that she feared the old lord's temper, that he had struck her once in anger when she refused to destroy the evidence of his deceit. Evelyn watched as Nathaniel's face hardened with each page. His hand trembled slightly, though his voice remained steady. She tried to expose him, he said. She wanted to protect me. The next letter was written only days before Isabel's death. He knows I will not yield, she had written. If anything happens to me, it will not be illness but consequence. Tell him I loved him enough to speak the truth even when it condemned me. Nathaniel's voice broke on the final words. He pressed the page to his chest and closed his eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire hissed softly, the sound like rain on leaves. "It was my father," he said at last, his voice hollow. "Not my mother. All this time I thought her severity hid guilt, but it was grief. She has borne the blame to protect his name and mine." Evelyn rose and crossed the room, standing beside him. "She feared the scandal would destroy you," she said gently. Perhaps she believed silence was mercy. He looked up at her, his eyes raw with pain. Mercy can become cruelty when it denies the dead their truth. He drew a sharp breath. "My mother forced me to accept a lie. I mourned my wife under false pretenses, and all the while the man I called father died honored and unrepentant." Grote. Evelyn touched his arm lightly. "You know the truth now, my lord. You can honor your wife by giving her voice at last." He shook his head slowly. "If I reveal this, my mother will be ruined. The Blackthorn name will be dragged through every drawing room in England. The tenants will suffer. The estate will fall. And yet to do nothing is to betray Isabel all over again." She met his gaze steadily. "You once told me silence had chained this house. The only way to free it is to speak." "Cousin." He turned away, staring into the flames. "You make it sound simple. Nothing about truth is simple," she said. "But it is the only thing that endures." He remained silent for a long time, then picked up the last letter. It was shorter than the others, written in a trembling hand. "If you find these words, it means I have failed to reach you. But remember, Nathaniel, love is not obedience. It is courage." He set it down carefully, as though it might break. "She knew me better than I knew myself." Evelyn's voice was soft. "Then let her memory make you stronger, not smaller." He turned to her then, and in his eyes she saw both ruin and resolve. "When morning comes, I will tell my mother what I have learned. Whatever she has done, she deserves the truth as much as I do." "I will stand beside you," she said. He gave a faint, weary smile. "I do not doubt it." Quote. The candle between them flickered, casting their shadows against the wall, two figures drawn together by sorrow, held upright by honesty. Outside, thunder rolled distantly over the moor, as though the earth itself were preparing to bear witness. As the hour deepened, neither spoke. Nathaniel gathered the letters and returned them to the box, his movements slow but deliberate. Evelyn knew he was sealing not only the paper but the fragments of a life now forever changed. When she finally left him, the first hint of dawn touched the sky, pale and uncertain. The rain had ceased, and the house was silent once more, though its silence felt different, less oppressive, as if it too had been listening. Evelyn paused at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, her heart heavy yet hopeful. The truth had come into the open, and with it the possibility of something new, something fragile but real. She did not yet call it love, but she felt its presence like the promise of sunlight behind the lingering clouds. Morning came grey and heavy, the kind of morning that carries the weight of things that cannot be undone. The house was quiet, though not with peace. A different kind of silence had settled, one that waited, listening for footsteps that would break it. Evelyn moved through the corridor with care, her pulse echoing in her ears. She knew that before the day ended, every secret that had haunted Blackthorn Hall would have voice. When she reached the library, Lord Nathaniel was already there. He stood near the window, the box of letters in his hands. His expression was calm, but the calm of a man who has made his choice and will not turn back. "She is waiting in the drawing room," he said without looking up. "I sent word that we must speak. She knows." Evelyn nodded. "You are ready?" "As ready as one can be to break what remains of family," he said quietly. "But truth will not grow gentler with delay." Together they crossed the hall. The drawing room was filled with pale light filtered through gauze curtains. Lady Agatha sat by the fire, dressed as always in black, her posture straight, her face unreadable. When she saw the box in her son's hands, her fingers tightened on the arm of the chair. "So," she said, "you found them." "Lovely." "I did," Nathaniel replied. His voice was measured, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of sorrow. "You might have told me." Lady Agatha's gaze flickered to Evelyn, then back to her son. "And what would that have served? The truth destroys. You were not strong enough to bear it then, and you are not strong enough now." "I am no longer a child, mother," he said. "You kept me in ignorance, made me mourn a lie. Isabel did not die of illness. She was silenced." Lady Agatha closed her eyes. "Do not force me to speak it aloud." "You will," he said firmly, "because I have read her words. I know father's crimes. I know he struck her when she refused to protect him, and I know you buried her truth to protect his name." Her head bowed slightly, as if the words themselves carried weight enough to press her down. "He was your father," she whispered. His shame would have become yours. I did what I must to preserve what could still be saved. What was saved? Nathaniel asked bitterly. Our fortune, our reputation. Look around you, mother. This house is filled with ghosts. You did not save us. You chained us to his sin. Evelyn stood near the doorway, silent but steady, her hands clasped before her. She felt as though she were watching something sacred and terrible, a reckoning that had been too long denied. Lady Agatha lifted her eyes at last. They were wet, though no tears fell. You think I am without remorse? I watched that girl die by inches, crushed between conscience and fear. I begged your father to end his cruelty. He swore it was discipline, not violence. I should have left him. But where would I have gone? A wife belongs to her husband, Nathaniel. It is a law written by men who never pay its price. Her voice trembled, then steadied again. When she died, I told myself it was better to seal the truth away. I could not bear the thought of you turning against the memory of your father. Nathaniel's voice softened, but it carried the quiet ache of broken faith. You should have trusted me with the truth. She shook her head slowly. I could not. You loved her. To tell you that she was taken from you by your own blood, it would have destroyed you. It destroyed me anyway, he said, only more slowly. For a long time there was only the sound of the fire. Then Lady Agatha spoke again, her tone lower, stripped of pride. What will you do now? I will not let her memory be a lie any longer, he said. The truth will be spoken, even if it ruins us. And me? She asked. Will you ruin me too? He looked at her with sorrow rather than anger. You ruined yourself when you chose silence, but I will not condemn you before the world. You are my mother. The truth will concern only those who deserve to know. Her composure cracked at last. She reached for him, her hand trembling. I did love you, Nathaniel. Everything I did, every lie, every silence was for love. He took her hand and held it gently. Then let love end where truth begins. She bowed her head, and for the first time he saw her not as the stern matriarch of his youth, but as an old woman bent beneath years of guilt. The firelight softened her face, and she looked strangely small, almost fragile. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet. Do what you must. I no longer have the strength to stop you. He nodded and released her hand. Turning to Evelyn, he said, It is done. Lady Agatha looked up at Evelyn. You brought him to this. I only helped him see what was already there, Evelyn replied. The older woman gave a faint smile. Then perhaps I should thank you. I would rather see him angry than blind. With that, she turned her gaze back to the fire. Her son stood for a moment longer, then inclined his head to her in silent farewell. Outside the room, Nathaniel paused, leaning against the wall as though the conversation had drained the last of his strength. Evelyn touched his sleeve lightly. She will come to understand, she said. Perhaps, he replied, or perhaps understanding is another form of punishment. They walked together down the corridor. For the first time the house felt lighter, though neither could yet call it peaceful. Truth had entered, and truth, once spoken, changes the air itself. When they reached the library again, he set the box of letters upon the mantel. No more secrets, he said. From this day forward, the dead shall rest in honesty. Evelyn met his gaze. And the living? He gave a faint, tired smile. The living must learn to begin again. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in many days. It spilled across the windows, catching in the dust motes that floated like golden threads through the air. Evelyn felt something inside her ease, a quiet sense that the house, at last, could breathe. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of Blackthorn Hall changed with the turning of the season. The fog that had so long clung to the moors began to lift, replaced by clear skies and a gentler wind. The house itself seemed to breathe again, its corridors filled not with whispers, but with the quiet sounds of ordinary life, the soft hum of servants at work, the laughter of a child, the rustle of fresh curtains drawn to let in light. Lady Agatha withdrew to her rooms, frailer with each passing day. Yet there was a peace in her silence now, the peace of one who no longer carried the burden of deception. Sometimes Evelyn brought her tea, or read aloud from one of the books Lady Agatha had once ignored. On those afternoons, the older woman would listen quietly, her eyes on the window where sunlight fell in golden stripes. Once, she said, almost to herself, I used to think truth and mercy could not live in the same house. Perhaps I was wrong. Evelyn reached out and touched her hand gently. They can live together if forgiveness opens the door. Lo. Lady Agatha smiled faintly, and for the first time her face looked almost kind. As winter turned toward spring, Lord Nathaniel began to restore the estate. The neglected gardens were trimmed, The west wing reopened to light and air. He did not conceal the past, but neither did he dwell on it. The letters of Lady Isabel were returned to their box and placed within the small chapel beside the garden, no longer hidden, but resting among flowers instead of dust. Amelia thrived. Her laughter filled the hallways like birdsong after a long storm. She adored her lessons, and she often brought her father small wildflowers from the fields, declaring that each one was a sign that the house was healing. Nathaniel never corrected her. He seemed content to let his daughter's faith define their world. One afternoon in early April, Evelyn stood by the chapel door, watching the light pour through the high windows. Nathaniel approached quietly, his steps soft on the stone floor. "You visit her often," he said. Evelyn turned and smiled. "She reminds me that even in death, truth can bloom again." He nodded. "I owe that truth to you." She shook her head. "You owed it to yourself. I only helped you find the path." They stepped outside together into the garden. The air smelled of rain and new blossoms. A pair of thrushes darted among the branches, their wings flashing in the sunday. For a long while, they walked without speaking. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was the kind of silence that belongs to understanding. At last, Nathaniel stopped near the old fountain, now cleared of moss and filled once more with water. Its gentle trickle caught the light like liquid glass. "This place once held secrets," he said. "Now it holds peace. You brought that here." "I did nothing alone," Evelyn replied. "It was the house that wanted to be healed. It only needed someone to listen." Quote. He looked at her then, and the warmth in his eyes left no space for uncertainty. "You have listened to everyone but yourself, Miss Marlowe. Tell me, what do you want now?" The question startled her. She glanced toward the house, the open windows, the laughter within, and then back to him. "I want what I have found here," she said slowly. "Not grandness, not wealth, but purpose. And perhaps," she added, her voice softer, "companionship." Quote. He smiled, the kind of smile that begins in sorrow and ends in hope. "I have lived too long in silence. I would like to share whatever years remain with someone who understands its cost." For a moment neither moved. The fountain's music filled the air, and a breeze stirred the petals of the early roses. Then Nathaniel took her hand, not in command or ceremony, but in quiet certainty. "Evelyn," he said, "will you stay? As governess, as guardian, as whatever name the world allows, but most of all as the heart of this home." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, yet her voice was steady. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." And so she did. In the months that followed, Blackthorn Hall became something new. The village began to speak of it, not as a house of tragedy, but as a place of generosity. Nathaniel reopened the estate school his wife had once dreamed of founding, and Evelyn oversaw it with patience and grace. Children from the surrounding farms came to learn beneath her guidance, and the hall that had once known only grief began to echo with the sound of learning and life. Sometimes in the quiet of evening, she would sit by the fountain and watch the stars reflected in its water. The letters were gone from her possession, but their words remained engraved upon her heart. Love is not obedience, it is courage. She thought often of Lady Isabel, of Lydia, of Lady Agatha, and even of the late Lord Blackthorn, whose sins had set everything in motion. They had all been bound by silence, and yet, through the breaking of that silence, something pure had survived. One evening, as the last light faded, Nathaniel joined her there. They watched the sky darken, the first stars flickering to life. "Strange," he murmured, "how peace can be so quiet." Evelyn smiled. "Peace does not shout, my lord. It listens." He took her hand again, and together they sat in stillness, the soft sound of water surrounding them like a benediction. The moon rose, casting silver upon the garden, and for the first time in many years, Blackthorn Hall was truly at rest.